Hey everyone, excited to be back for this week's edition of Frequently Asked Questions for Commercial Real Estate. In today's video, what I thought I'd do is talk about a strategy called a 1031 exchange. And this is an investment strategy that investors use in order to defer taxes into the future. So now you may be asking, what is a 1031 exchange? It's effectively a swap of investment property in order to defer taxes, in particular capital gains taxes, into the future. So as an example, let's say you buy a property for $200,000 10 years ago, and now you want to sell the property, it's worth $500,000. If you were to sell the property today for $500,000, you would realize a $300,000 gain. So essentially what would happen is you would be taxed at the long-term capital gains rate since you've held it for longer than a year, which would effectively result in you paying $60,000 in taxes for capital gains. So essentially what we're trying to avoid as an investor is to having to pay those capital gains taxes by executing a 1031 exchange to defer those taxes in the future. And a lot of investors can do that almost indefinitely. So what is a 1031 exchange and what are the rules? Well, one of the main rules is that you can only exchange property for like-kind property. Now you may be thinking, what's like-kind property? Is it essentially the same thing? So for example, if I own an apartment complex, can I only exchange it for an apartment complex? That is not true, actually. So it's actually relatively liberal what like-kind property is. You could exchange an apartment complex for raw land. Or you can go ahead and exchange a ranch for a strip mall. It just has to be the same, not necessarily the same, but it has to be similar type of property. So you couldn't exchange, for example, apartment complex for 4 F-150s, right? That just doesn't work that way. So it has to be real property that you actually exchange it for. Now, along with that, you also have to include a qualified intermediary that's going to hold the funds. And there's various qualified intermediaries around the country. If you search for them, you can actually find some online. But essentially what they do is once you sell your original property, they hold the funds for you until you purchase your next property. And when the purchase is executed, they would release the funds for you to purchase that property, and therefore the 1031 exchange would be completed. Now, if you don't have a qualified intermediary in place, then you would essentially nullify the 1031 exchange and you'd have to pay your capital gains taxes. So it's extremely important to include a qualified intermediary in your process of doing a 1031 exchange. Now that we understand it, you can only exchange for like-kind property and you have to involve a qualified intermediary who's going to hold the funds for you after you sell your original property. Now we have to go into the actual rules of a 1031 exchange. The rules of a 1031 exchange dictate that within 45 days of your original sale of your property, you must identify up to 3 properties that you potentially would close on with no limit on the value of those properties. Now, there's other rules that dictate that, you can have up to, I think, 20 or more properties that you can identify. But at that point, you have to close on at least 90%, and there's a value limit as well. And we're not going to dive into that situation right now just because it's not as common as this particular strategy, which is to identify 3 properties within the 45-day timeline that you could potentially close on with no value limit. So that's step number 1. Within that 45 days, identify the properties. Step number 2 is within the 180 days, you have to close on at least one of those properties. And honestly, once you close on those properties, the qualified intermediary would release the funds to be able for you to finalize the actual purchase of those properties. So it is a pretty constricted timeline. And that's one of the reasons why whenever you're going through a 1031 exchange, it's probably wise to start looking at properties prior to you actually selling your original property, because you're really not going to have too much time in order to close on it and get everything done such that you're able to effectively execute a 1031 exchange. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was valuable to you. If you did like this video, feel free to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. I always like providing awesome, engaging content related to commercial real estate. If you're in the market for doing a 1031 exchange, and maybe you own a property and you want to exchange it into some sort of commercial property, feel free to reach out to me. My number is 502-536-7315, or you can reach me via email at Raphael at CRE All right, we'll see you guys next time. See ya.